Welcome. This is the Pro B-Ball Report Postgame show with co-host James Borbath, and I'm your host Stephen Brotherston, editor of Pro B-Ball Report. We just watched a game that, for all intents and purposes, makes no sense to anyone. Somehow, Toronto pulled out the 110-107 win over the Celtics, despite getting out-rebounded. I better read this. It's not 55-24. Something wrong there? Anyway,
That happened. That's a fact.
they were literally giving up 90% shooting for most of the first quarter. They could do nothing right. Kyle Lowry did come
That
back and play an amazing game, but James, to be honest, watching that game, I'm just a little confused. What do you think?
it's typical Raptors. What can you say? I mean, they gave up 78.9% shooting in the first quarter, 35 points. I believe the Raptors have given up 30 plus points more in the first quarter than they have this year. Oh, by the way, they're 4-1, now 1-0 in the division. And Kyle Lowry, for anyone who doubted what the Raptors paid him and for how long, I think those people have nothing left to say. Because, honest to God, if Kyle Lowry isn't the Toronto Raptor, this game isn't even close.
It was basically a savior type effort after that first quarter. And Kyle actually wasn't playing bad in the first quarter. He was one of the guys who could sort of say was trying to do his job. DeMar DeRozan did have lots of points. He got 23 points, 6 assists, had his moments, but he was 9 of 25 from the field and did not have a particularly good game. Both Amir Johnson and Jonas Valanciunas were out, and Patrick Patterson and Tyler Hansbrough came in and got the starts, and we're doing a really, really good sales job as to why they should be coming off the bench, because they did not look comfortable at all in that first quarter. They looked so out of their element. Was really hoping, I think a lot of people are hoping that Patrick Patterson could become a potential starter, and you wouldn't want to say based on a couple of games that that's not in the cards. But he's looked so much better in the last two games. After the first quarter was over, he'd gone to the bench and was coming back into the game. I guess the most interesting thing for a lot of Canadians, Kelly Olynyk, who hopefully will be on the Canadian national team, is growing up. He's looking like he's becoming a player. We had a lot of good news if you're a Boston Celtics fan in terms of looking at young guys out there playing, and in a game they lost, it was the stats are almost shocking. I don't know, what did you see from those very much maybe underestimated green Celtics?
It's funny. Boston, they have a nice young team. I mean, Rondo, he played with the big three, which seems like years ago now. But, Rondo's such a great player, and, the talk is that he's going to get traded out of there. But every moment that these young guys get to play with Rajon Rondo is a great learning experience for all of them, because he's just a guy who, I mean, he had another triple-double tonight. He's had, I don't know how many in his career, but a lot of them have come at the hands of the Toronto Raptors. I do know that much. And he's just a special, talented player. That said, Kyle Lowry brings a lot of the things that Rajon Rondo brings to the game, especially his defensive effort, which was on display in the fourth quarter down the stretch in that game. Made a great steal, got the Raptors out on the break. The huge dunk by DeRozan, and that was it didn't necessarily salt this game away, but it kind of felt like it salted this game away. And I think, it's funny, we were talking before we started the show, and I say this with all sincerity, I think Kyle Lowry is the best point guard in Raptor history right now. Like, I really do. And, some may say, well, yeah, but they're the Raptors. It's been 20 years of But at the point guard position, you can argue that's been their strongest position for 20 years. I mean, we've had guys like T.J. Ford, Jose Calderon. Damon Stoudemire was their first ever draft pick. Mark Jackson was a point guard here. Chris Childs, no, he doesn't deserve to be on the list. But a lot of good guys have played that position here. That's my point. And I think Kyle Lowry is hands above all of them, and mainly because he can play defense. The one knock against Jose Calderon, for all the people out there that like him, he couldn't play defense. Kyle Lowry can play defense in spades, and anyone who can guard their position in the NBA, that's huge, because more and more in this league, defense is becoming a lost art form, and not everybody does it. Just like the old Bill Russell saying, effort is a skill because not everybody does it. Defense is becoming that way in the NBA.
Yeah, and Lowry has proven since he's been here in Toronto that he has that nose for the big moment, the ability to make that game-changing play, and not just on the offensive end, which he really did show with that nice pass for the finish for DeRozan, which kind of was an exclamation point, maybe just a little bit early. But he's done that at the defensive end where he's got the big steal. And I think for a lot of Toronto fans who've been watching some rather iffy basketball from a team that's winning a lot at the moment, Lou Williams is the nice surprise in terms of incoming, we'll call him a point guard to be nice, because he's a little short for a shooting guard, but a guard. Once again, Lou Williams came in. He had 2 steals. He had a big impact in the game, 5-10 in the field, 11 points. He's one of those things they were missing last year. A guy to bring it off the bench who's a bit of a game changer. You're going to rely on Kyle Lowry as your horse to do the heavy lifting for most of the way. You need a guy like Lou Williams to come in off the bench and keep things going and find some points for you, especially if you're going to play like they've been playing the last little while, where defense through stretches of the game, especially first quarters, has been very, very suspect, and they got to put up the points. Lou Williams has become that kind of guy for this team. He's been covering up some mistakes or some soft play in this early part of the season. Getting back to the Celtics, just to put this in context, because there's going to be some guys in Boston that are pulling their hair out right now. Jeff Green has 20 points. Jared Sullinger goes off for 19 points and 16 boards. Kelly Olynyk, 18 points and 13 boards. And Rondo's triple-doubles of 13, 10, and 15. This wasn't a slide-in. He had a solid triple-double. Those were big numbers. He was a big impact player. And really getting back to our initial comments, how did Toronto win this game? It just didn't look like it was there. They couldn't get a rebound to save their life. How they actually got the ball back at times was a mystery. James, is there any
it's
here to take away?
It's funny though, because when you look at Boston, they're kind of how Toronto used to be, right? They're fighting. They've been in a lot of their games this year. They mentioned on the broadcast that they were in a close game with Boston. They had, the game with Brooklyn the opening night where they were very, very competitive and were able to get a win. I mean, Boston's been a pleasant surprise. And I mean, when you look at the Raptors division, and this was their first divisional game tonight, I think you can honestly say this Boston team has a chance to not maybe win the division, but I don't think they're necessarily the lock to be last place in this division like a lot of people thought they were. And it's interesting. And, another team in this division that hasn't looked terrible is Philadelphia. I mean, this division ultimately is going to be a 2-horse race, but the bottom 2 teams are not as bad as people thought they were. And that's why when you get at what this game means in the whole grand scheme of things for the Raptors, it's very important that the Raptors take care of business in games against Boston and games against Philadelphia for that divisional record. And that's why, a lot of times we talk about this. At the end of the day, no one's going to remember how this game turned out. A month from now, they're going to look back on the schedule. They're going to see a W, and that's all it's going to be. A lot of people will just simply forget. Now we're amazed and shocked, but bottom line is the Raptors did what they were supposed to do. They won a divisional game. That said, I can't imagine that Dwayne Casey is happy at all with this team right now. Like, the defensive effort coming out of the gate, and then the way they played down the stretch is like polar opposites, and I'm a little confused by it all. And one of the things that's interesting, and I don't know if this has anything to do with it or not, but Dwayne Casey's defense, generally speaking, isn't supposed to produce a lot of steals because it's a zone system, and they're supposed to kind of hang back a little bit. But yet the Raptors have tons of steals this year. DeMar DeRozan had a night where he had a career high in steals. Larry's been getting steals. You mentioned Lou Williams. So on the surface, that sounds great. But is these guys freelancing in the defensive system? Only Dwayne Casey knows the answer to that. I don't have that answer for you. But, bottom line, though, their effort in the first quarter on defense was just lacking.
It was very much lacking. They had 11 steals tonight. And, DeRozan had that 6-steal game, which was amazing. They were getting a lot of these steals when they increased their defensive intensity, when they were making stuff happen. They were getting deflections, and they were recovering the ball. I never got the impression from Casey that's how he thought a defense should operate. But when they're out there getting hands in lanes, deflecting passes, and they're slowing down the scoring of the other team and getting the stops, if you can get the steals, that does have a big impact in the game. That's how Toronto won this game, was on turnovers. If the Celtics could have kept their turnovers to a normal level, say 15, they're walking away with this one. It's not going to be close because they just owned the boards and there was nothing Toronto could do about it. This Celtics team's been really, really interesting. They're now 1-3 on the season. They came into the night averaging 108 points a game, got 107 in this game, but they were giving up 109, and Toronto scored 110. And I think that very much ties back to your comment. These Celtics do remind me a lot of prior Raptors teams that fought hard and came up short, and you always saw them, they were right there. You looked like they should have won, and they found a way to lose at the end. And that's endemic with young teams, with a lot of young players. It's probably the biggest advantage the Raptors have this season is, they got a couple of rookies, and they're watching over there on the bench where they belong because they're not ready to play yet, and this team's not all about developing the rookies this year. They're actually trying to win games. The Boston Celtics, they're all about developing those young guys. That is the most important thing. And the reason I think so many of us, including myself, don't see Boston as a good team for the whole season is if there's any way at all they could move out Rondo, they've got to do it. He'll help these guys, but he'll help them win too many games, and their draft pick won't be as good. Their only other viable strategy is to package some of these pretty good-looking young guys and bring in that veteran star, and they did try to do that, and they took their shot at Kevin Love and got turned down.
That's what Danny Ainge did before, right? I mean, that's how he got Kevin Garnett, and when he got Kevin Garnett, he was able to get Ray Allen because once Kevin Garnett was on board, Ray Allen was willing to come there, and that's how he was able to do it the last time. So I mean, if he can try and do something like that again with Rondo and keep him around, it might not be the worst thing in the world for Boston, but it's interesting because he's a hard guy to read, Rajon Rondo. He's very temperamental and moody, and you never really get a sense of where his head is at. And again, we mentioned the comparison to Kyle Lowry. That sounds a lot like Kyle Lowry, although Kyle Lowry this year, really, the moodiness has stopped a lot with him, and you notice it in how he is out on the floor, and you get to interact with him with covering games. I don't anymore, but I imagine that's changed too because he just seems a lot more comfortable in his own skin. Rajon Rondo, he doesn't. He seems very agitated by this whole situation he finds himself in. And, none of it's his fault. I mean, the other guys left. He stayed. It wasn't his fault. But, I think it's an interesting comparison to have. And the one thing that I think is crystal clear, if Kyle Lowry plays anywhere close to how he did tonight, if he's not an all-star, there should be a criminal investigation, because last year I think he deserved to be there, but DeRozan got there. I think this year Kyle Lowry has to be there.
For me, the way Kyle Lowry becomes an all-star is you get to the end of December with Toronto in first place in the Atlantic, at least within touch of first and second place in the conference, which if they're first in the Atlantic, they should be. And then Kyle Lowry becomes someone who's really hard to ignore, because it's really obvious that he's the engine that drives this team. I did a story just a week and a half ago, which ties in very much to why you see a different Kyle Lowry, and a different Kyle Lowry than Boston has with Rajon Rondo. Last year in the playoffs, Kyle Lowry was the first of the young dads on the Toronto Raptors to put up the picture of his son drew for him. He's like 2 years old, so it's just a typical picture that any dad would recognize from a little kid, for his dad. It's really cute. And there's a little picture under it this year with him and his son. The story I did was Amir, who is also a young dad with a young daughter. And this year you've got Amir and DeMar and Kyle, and above each of their lockers is a picture of them and their little kid. And these guys all talk. They all basically just say it's one of their pressure releases. They don't have to talk basketball. When they leave, they walk out, girlfriend, wives, little kids. Everyone's all smiles no matter what happened. You have to be happy. You can't be unhappy in front of a 2-year-old. That's just not. You can't do it. And none of these guys do. They all look like great dads, and they all really put the game behind them. And they're happier. You could see the demeanor change last year with Kyle as the season went on. Being a young dad has made him a happier person. Having players on the team, not just anybody, important guys on the team, important to him, who have young kids, they now have something really in common. This has been a big deal. That's not something we've really experienced much in Toronto with the team. This team's bonding both on and off the court. That's one of the reasons why they were successful last year.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I think some fans who are so into basketball and huge fans of the Raptors and huge fans of the sport in general, I don't think they understand that. They think that well, that's all these guys should be talking about, thinking about 24/7 is basketball, because that's what I do. I wake up every morning and I'm worried about the Raptors' next game or blah 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 blah. No, that's not how it works. And I mean, it's funny because oftentimes when you ask those questions, I remember not when the Raptors were winning, but I remember when DeMar and Sonny were both here, and they were great friends. I used to ask, well, what do you guys talk about when you're hanging out? And basketball was never the answer, because it's just, that's the way it is. Like, people need an escape from their work. As long as you're showing up, you're doing your work, you're practicing, you're putting in the effort, and you're playing the games, that's all that should matter. When you go home, you go home. And as long as you're putting in the effort, and certainly DeMar DeRozan does, and obviously Kyle Lowry has been. But all that said, it's puzzling the way this team has played, because I don't know what it is with this team. It's almost like they're a little full of themselves from last year, and they haven't really... They've gotten away with a lot of stuff that if they were playing a better brand of competition in these first 5 games, there's no question to me they wouldn't be 4-1. But they've gotten away with it, and they are 4-1. And like the old expression goes, you are what your record says you are, and that's where they find themselves. But I think they really have to tighten things up, and they really have to get their heads screwed on straight eventually, or this isn't going to hold up for an entire season. In fact, it's not going to hold up for an entire month, I don't think. It eventually, the other shoe's going to drop, and when you give up 35 points in the first quarter, guess what? You're actually going to pay for it, and you're going to lose.
Yeah, when they play Washington on Friday, they can't come out as flat as they did to start this game. They're going to play Chicago later in the month, and then starting on November 22nd, they got 3 games against the Cavaliers over a span of about 3 weeks, which could really set the bar for this team for the rest of the year. And they have to have it all figured out by the time they face a team with that much talent. This homestand that they're starting, almost every game's a winnable game. And from a context from following this team over the years, it's hard to relate. The Raptors are expected to win the Atlantic Division. They are favored against most of the teams that are coming into their building and most of the teams they're going and visiting. We're really not used to this. We've set expectations which are reasonable based on the talent level the team has. And when they come out flat, it's really, really noticeable. When this team was expected to hope, and if everything went just right, squeeze into the last playoff spot in the East, well, it wasn't much of a shock when they lost a game or had a bad quarter. That's not the case anymore. There's going to be some churning stomachs and hair pulling going on when this team comes out flat, because they have the ability to not do that this year.
And more importantly than us, or fans, they're not used to this either. Like, they're not used to being the team that's hunted, being the team that's expected to win night in, night out. And I think the one person who's tearing his hair out more than anybody else has to be Dwayne Casey. Like he may put on well, Dwayne Casey's not a guy who smiles a lot, but he'll put on a certain attitude for the media about how they're playing right now. But behind closed doors, he has to be just livid with some of the things he's seen in these first 5 games. And I, quite frankly, don't blame him. I think his team, like I said, I think they're a little full of themselves. I think they think they're pretty good, and they are pretty good, but you have to remember what it took for them to get to where they were last year. And that's the thing that I think is lacking. It's a process, and it's always a tricky thing. The first time a team makes the playoffs, to have them buy into the fact of how hard it takes to get back to that point. Because once you've climbed that mountain, it's very easy to forget how hard it was to get to the top of it. And I think this Raptor team, some people here and there have forgotten that. And another concern early on, Terrence Ross didn't play well tonight. And Terrence Ross had a horrible playoffs. And I've never been the guy's biggest fan, but it's got to be a bit of a concern at this point, because he doesn't seem to be able to keep up with the pace of everybody else. And we're talking about defense lacking. He's supposed to be one of the guys on this team that is a good defender, and we're not seeing it.
Well, Terrence hasn't had a good start to the year. It was hoped that we'd see another step. And it is early. We're looking at, to a certain extent, these guys, they're a week into the season, and they're playing like maybe they needed more minutes in the preseason, but you're afraid to do that. Just look at the guys who got hurt this year. But, man, it really looks like a guy like Terrence Ross, and even Jonas, you'd swear he's shooting at a moving basket these days, because he's missing shots he's no business missing. These 2 young guys look like they're still working their way into this season. They're not at the level they were at last April. They need to find something.
Although Jonas, on the stuff that matters, and the stuff that matters to Dwayne Casey is defense, I think he has been good enough to an extent. Offensively, you're right, it's been hit and miss, but he's got a lot of things going on in his head, and this may sound like an excuse or a cop-out, but I think it's true. Big men always take longer to develop, and it's hard to find a big man with the skill set of a Jonas Valanciunas. It just doesn't happen every day. Sorry to break the news to Terrence Ross. People like him are a dime a dozen in the NBA. You can find a wing guy who can defend and shoot and do all the things that Terrence Ross does. You can find him anywhere. They're a dime a dozen. And a lot of people, when DeMar DeRozan first started out, they thought, he's nothing special. We should get somebody better. DeMar worked and worked and worked and got to the point to where he is now. Not a great night for him tonight, I realize, but in general, night in, night out, he's become an all-star level player. I don't know if Terrence Ross ever gets there, and, he's one of those, it's just one of those positions in the league. It's so easy to replace that position.
Yep, it's always hard to call developing young guys. With the big guys, there's such a shortage. You have to work with a guy like Jonas Valanciunas. There's really no choice because he has the potential to become a solid center, a difference maker.
Yeah, and if he does, that's such a huge advantage for the Raptors because it changes everything. A legitimate big man in this league is a rarity now, and the way it opens up the floor and how much easier it will make everyone else's life if Jonas Valanciunas can become a solid post presence for the Toronto Raptors, it will be amazing. This team will be able to score at will. And if he can be the guy they expect on defense, the Raptors will have something they haven't had, I want to say, in their entire history. The Toronto Raptors have never had a shot-blocking presence of any note other than Keon Clark at times was that. Antonio Davis, you could argue, some games would provide that. But a legitimate shot-blocking force they have never really had for any true length of time. And Jonas is a guy who I think is fully capable of being that.
Well, the Raptors are about to start on Friday for 2 weeks straight at home. And this is where these young guys and even DeMar should really come into mid-season form over this stretch. Everyone should get comfortable. This is an important stretch for the team to set the tenor for the rest of their season. You really can't complain when a team's 4-1, despite of the sloppy, poor starts, the Herculean effort it took for Lowry to come back and win this game. All those things aside, the win's a win. They got a good record. They now have a homestand where this team can set the tone for what should be the best season this team has had in their franchise history. During the homestand, our post-game show will be on hiatus. I don't often have the chance to get back to do a broadcast while I'm covering games here in Toronto, but we will get back at it again. There'll be lots of away games after this homestand, or the penalty for 2 weeks at home is an awful lot of road games coming up.
Yeah, and then that'll be the eve of my birthday, and they'll be playing Cleveland, correct?
Yes, they will.
So that should be fun. So for the next one of these, people are encouraged to send me presents because my birthday will, depending on if there's lots of overtimes, it could actually be my birthday when we're doing this show. So send me presents, and if you don't want to give me a present, your questions. We want to have questions on the show. We want to make it interactive for all of you. So use that hashtag on Twitter, Pro B-Ball Report. So that is PBR Post. Use the hashtag, and we want to interact with you and answer your questions and make the show fun for you to play along at home like a game show, Steve.
And as usual, I'll have some interviews coming up again over the next few days that I got at the last home game. Had a nice talk with James Johnson, who's having a good start to his return to the Raptors. And as James has said, as long as his head doesn't grow, Toronto's got a great find here because he's been playing really well, and if he stays within his role and stays within his abilities, man, he's been really effective. He was a big impact into the game tonight.
Yeah, one last thing. That steal he made on that one play is one of the strangest plays I've ever seen in 30-plus years of watching basketball. That was bizarre. He has earned the nickname the Ninja to me. Like, that was unbelievably bizarre. And, yeah, always a great guy to talk to. A great interview. Really speaks his mind.
And that's a wrap. It was a nice win. Nice. I don't mind being a little under the gun there at the end and looking like it was at risk. It was exciting. Look for more, and we'll be back in about 2 weeks for the next broadcast.